Welcome to Behind the Wines, a freshly bottled podcast about Australian wine, the wines we love, and the people behind them. My mission is simple. I want to get down into the cellar with sommeliers, stomp some grapes with winemakers, and have chats with our finest critics, growers, retailers, and chefs. And today I'm joined by Tom Donegan, National Sales Manager at Shaw & Smith. Tom has one of the most well-rounded resumes in Australian wine, with a career that's taken him from sommelier roles in Melbourne to leading market development in the US, and now overseeing national sales for one of Australia's most respected wineries. Tom, welcome to Behind the Wines.
Thank you, Brett. Good to be here.
Now, you've worked across nearly every facet of the wine industry, from sommelier roles to importer and now national sales. What initially drew you to the world of wine?
I think what drew me to the world of wine early on, as quite a young guy, was just a curiosity. I was exposed to wine through family life, not at a serious level or a high level, but it always piqued an interest. And one thing that I always wanted to understand is why some wines were different to others, why some were better than others. And I think once you start on that journey and you go down a bit of a rabbit hole, you sort of don't come back from it. And so a passion was lit. I remember a point probably when I was about 23 where I was thinking, can you make a career out of this? And at that point, I worked at places like Prince Wine Store, and I was going to embark on a master's degree, but it was a moment that was pivotal because I thought, if I do this, I'm committing and I'm going all in, and it worked out really well.
Your time in the US with Hudson Wine Brokers seems pivotal. How did it shape your understanding of the global wine market and particularly Australian wine's place in it?
Yeah, my understanding of the global wine market was first probably triggered through my university. It was my master's degree at the University of Adelaide. It was the content in that master's degree showed how important the global market was for Australian wine. When you look at what we produce and our population, it doesn't add up. You need that global market to be kind of performing. And through that study, we explored the highs and lows of Australia in markets like the US, and China was a market that was starting to kind of grow. And so from there, I thought I want to be able to have an influence in this part of our industry. The other thing that was coupled while I was doing that master's degree was I was working as a sommelier in Melbourne, which was a good counterbalance to the study because you are on a weekly basis exposed to, the best small producers of Australia. When we looked abroad and you looked at what was available internationally from Australia, and then we looked in the Melbourne dining scene of what we were serving, those wines weren't over there. So part of the reason of setting up that business was to kind of take what we thought was some of the best Australian wines that weren't being represented, that did fill this, I guess, middle tier. It wasn't the cheap stuff that had flooded the market. It wasn't the seriously expensive, high-pointed wines that had previously flooded the market and had their ups and downs. So we were pretty focused on bringing the best small producers from great regions to the US. There was a little thought bubble on China, whether we would play around there, but I thought in terms of a lifestyle of living somewhere, the US appealed, and also in terms of being able to get a message out, it felt a bit easier.
So you've been with Shaw & Smith for over 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to that team, and how did your role evolve from Victas market manager to national sales manager?
Shaw & Smith is a winery that, when you are in sales and marketing, I can't really speak for other people, but I always looked at what they were doing because they always seem to do things at a pretty high level. And that's not just from sales and marketing, it's from great growing and producing as well. But when I first got back from the USA, I was working with a producer in Margaret River. I was looking after them nationally, but they were a smaller producer than Shaw & Smith. And a couple of years into that role, the phone call came through from Shaw & Smith, and I knew a few people that were in leadership positions there, and an opportunity came up just to look after Victoria and support a little bit in the US where I'd lived. And to me, to work with a group like that, even though the focus was narrower in just Victoria, it was a bit of an obvious decision to make because the quality of work they were doing across a few brands was quite exciting. And then I've been lucky, the gent that hired me, he moved on to another opportunity, and I got to kind of, flow into that slipstream about 3 years ago. So I've been doing the national role since 2022, and we've got a great team of people around the country, and working with our distributor in red and white as well. So, and then from there, took the move to Adelaide and to be based at the winery.
For those who don't know, what are the biggest differences between managing a market and running a national sales strategy?
It's a good question. Again, I mean, managing a market, which I tend to miss sometimes, is that you can have an impact quite quickly and you build very tight relationships with your customers and your partners. So I think one of the, the fun things of our job when you're managing a market is getting ready for a release and going out and showing the latest set of wines to a whole lot of people that are very good at what they do on the buying side, and then they plan to share it with their customers. So I'd say that's the fun part. And if you're in market management or in sales and you don't enjoy that part, I'd probably say go find something else to do, because that really is the fun part. The national side is you are planning out the releases and how they will roll ahead of time, how it will roll out through your distribution team. And probably the learning there is if you get it wrong or you make the wrong call, a lot of people are affected along the way. So it is just a bit more forward planning. But in saying that, in our business, we still like to, we don't want to get bogged down in that. We still want to get out there and be with our customers, and our CEO will still say yes to any opportunity to get out and show the wine and present them to, our favourite places. So we still keep a foot in each, I guess, is probably the best way to describe it. But when you are in market, in a market management role, you are just doing that face-to-face a bit more frequently.
So how does your experience as a sommelier influence your sales and leadership style?
Yeah, I was fortunate with my years as a sommelier because I worked with some really great people who are really strong at what they do. And I think when I went into that type of work, and this was, when I was 23, 24, doing a master's degree, probably through till about 28, I didn't know the level that was required at that early point. And, then you go and do courses like Certified Sommelier certification, advanced wine assessment courses out of Adelaide, and you realize the amount of knowledge and depth of thought that you've got to put into every selection and the seriousness of it. So probably went from the earliest thinking, oh, this is a bit of fun, to holy hell, this is quite a lot of work. And I think what it does is the main influence is it exposes you to who's doing the best work from a producer side of things, who's putting in the effort, who's being the most innovative, who's being the most groundbreaking, and the standard is set quite high, so it's the exposure, I think, to the top end of the wine industry in terms of producers that kind of then sets your level of where you want to be playing in. So I was quite fortunate because I probably didn't know at that time how serious some parts of the industry were almost 20 years ago.
What's that taught you as a leader then?
I mean, as a leader, I think that we value education and that we want to, at least in our business, have real authenticity around that. It's about having a standard and having a genuine approach to kind of working to that standard and sharing it with other people. So in terms of leadership, I think, we try to attract people that already have that kind of approach to the wine industry, but then through a leadership way, we just help each other maintain it. It's probably the best way to sum that up.
Given that this podcast kind of is heavy Melbourne influence, remiss of me not to ask you about your time at Coda. Given that we've just asked you about your sommelier, yep. I believe you were there when Coda was rocking.
I think it still is probably rocking, but those first 2 years were really fun. And I remember it was my first job in a restaurant, and the reason I went there is because when I was working at Prince Wine Store, the owner would come in and always ask our recommendation on a good bottle of wine. He's now a good friend of mine, Michael Bartholomew. And when he would come in, he would always say, I'm going to open a restaurant soon, and this is what we've got in mind. And there's a period there that I went overseas and sort of floating around some of the regions of France and Italy. And then I came back, and I think they'd been open for about 2 months. So I was like, oh, that guy's opened this restaurant. And I thought I'll go in and ask for a job, and we weren't a family that went out to fancy restaurants a lot. And they gave me a job. I'm not sure why, because my first 2 months trying to carry plates was probably pretty embarrassing, but they had a really strong team that were hospitality professionals, and that was Michael and Kate who owned it. And then people like Trav Howe who were running the wine list, and they'd come from Taxi, and this is going back a while, but Taxi 2000 and probably 5, 6, 7, 8, probably one of the best restaurants in the country with the best wine lists. And so they had that backing, and that's sort of what I alluded to before, that exposed to a way of doing things. And it was fun, and it was at high quality. And I'm sure the first year we probably got away with a bit, but the ambience and the service and the food was exciting, and there probably wasn't as much of that type of restaurant as there is now. This is going back 2009 and 10. So it did expose me to that world. And then I took the pivot to Stokehouse, which was a hard thing to do because I became good friends with all of them. But the appeal of the Stokehouse was a really big wine list with the best wines of the world and the opportunity on any given day to open any of those wines, depending on who was coming in. And so at that point, you're just learning from exposure. And so I made that call and spent a couple of years there as well. But it was an exciting time for food and wine in Melbourne. There was a real buzz, and the restaurants along that Flinders Lane at the time really became quite friendly with each other. Cumulus had already been open and was doing good things, and Movida was down the road, and there was a bit of a camaraderie because it was quite new and exciting, and very different to how that precinct sort of operates today.
Yeah, definitely iconic hospitality in Melbourne, that whole region at the time. It still is, really. And thanks for bringing me the memory of going to Taxi and being exposed to Oregon Pinots. That was like the first time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, they had a red hot sommelier team that found things, discovered things. It was a benchmark.
You've represented some of the most iconic Australian regions and producers. What trends are you seeing across the Australian wine scene right now?
That's another good question. What trends there's several trends. I mean, if you want to look at the positive trends, I'd say and it might be an obvious one, but you look at Chardonnay, and Chardonnay, I'd say as a variety in Australia is world class. And I think it's a variety that if we were to take our wines and put them shoulder to shoulder with any of the same variety from around the world, they're going to stand up. I'm not sure the world knows that yet, but it's real. Quality across the country, not just from one area, is really serious. And I think that's been happening for a while, but it feels like probably the last 3, 4, 5 years, it's really become a consistent level, which is quite exciting. I think, which you don't see so much, it's harder to pick up on just from seeing what's on the shelf in a bottle shop or on a wine list. But I think probably the next stage of Australian wine and the growth that we're achieving is through viticulture. There is some serious gains being made in viticulture, in standards, in approaches, in clonal material, in planting density and site selection. And I think if you look back to maybe like the 80s and 90s when things were being planted, and then you look at how people are replanting now or how they're approaching things, there's a different approach. It's very much quality and long-term now. And so that obviously takes time to show itself in the glass. But I think that's like a next phase and exciting period of Australian wine is serious viticulture. And it can also come through varieties, can come through going to McLaren Vale and seeing someone pull out Shiraz and planting, some Southern Italian varieties and rethinking what works. But it can also be someone replanting their Pinot Noir block that wasn't set up properly, and they're going to go high density and better clonal material and maybe, more regenerative practices. So that to me is probably the exciting part of Australian wine, because it's pretty genuine and it's really knowledge driven and it's quite innovative. But it's like you're seeing one variety catch fire. It's actually seeing how people across the country are applying themselves and making gains. So hopefully that continues and it catches on and it's contagious, because it's a good thing.
So you mentioned viticulture. What do you think the biggest opportunity and the biggest threat facing Australian premium wine today?
I'd say the biggest threat is not innovating. Now, get varieties like Shiraz, and we have, made a good go of Shiraz over maybe half a century or so, and quite excited with a lot of the cool climate Shiraz that is out there. That can be from Great Southern, Adelaide Hills, Yarra Valley, Macedon, the southern parts of Heathcote. So I guess the concern there is with Shiraz, I think it's planted in something like 61 of our 62 GIs, right? And does that make a lot of sense? Probably not. So the threat there is to keep going down the same route if it hasn't been working. And the opportunity is, if you innovate, is what else could work that has a bit more of a long-term kind of suitability and sustainability for an area. So that's probably an opportunity, a threat tied into one. Threat, which I think we're seeing playing out in real time, is how Australia competes at the really commercial level. It's not cheap to produce things in Australia, and a lot of our wine internationally has been on the lower end, and that market in general is declining, and then it's hard for us to compete with other countries that can do it cheaper. So it's not an easy thing for parts of the industry to experience, but it is a threat that's happening right now. And then I think the opportunities sort of flows on from what I was saying about viticulture. It's setting things up properly, it's committing to them, it's having regions that band together, that have a good mosaic of stories that they get out there. And I'd like to think the opportunities exist internationally. That takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of alignment, which is not often easy to achieve.
Has the post-COVID landscape shifted the way producers and distributors engage with trade and consumers?
Definitely. It's, again, I can't speak for every producer or distributor out there. I know that we really value the trade and our trade relationships, and COVID was a very difficult time because we saw a lot of our good customers / friends going through a lot of challenges, particularly on the restaurant side of things. And we felt like we'd been through some of those challenges ourselves in a way, because a lot of people may not remember, but that Christmas period of 2019, so about 3 months before COVID arrived, there was a lot of fires in Australia, and the Adelaide Hills was hit by fires. So actually the previous year we'd had smoke issues in Tasmania, where our Tolpuddle Vineyard is. So we, from an agricultural side, had been faced with a whole lot of challenges that were really genuinely affecting our business, whether it's yields that are being savaged or whether some wines could not be released at all. So we dealt with some catastrophe there. And then 3 months later, we saw our restaurant customers in a world of uncertainty, particularly in Melbourne, but Sydney and other cities as well. And it was challenging. So how it changed, everyone pivoted quickly. And I'd say probably the years coming out of it, it's tightened the bond with a lot of distributors, producers and trade customers. I think in the sense that people are working together more. There's a clearer communication on what to expect, what's difficult, and that's a real positive. And so people are probably more supportive of each other rather than maybe more of a transactional sort of nature. And so it would be interesting to see how that plays out over time. But I think it's been quite an obvious shift in that people are working with each other more and are a bit more open and honest with each other in what's going well and what isn't going well and where the challenges are. So as bad as it was, and probably in some areas continues to still be on the rebound, it's not, there's probably some silver linings to it all.
So it sounds like out of necessity and hardship, you really got some close bonds there.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why you can't speak for everyone, because that's how we've seen it. We've got a lot of customers and good distributor, so you can't. Some other people might not be experiencing it that way, but we certainly have, because we've made sure that we've been there for our customers and vice versa.
Sustainability and storytelling are both hot topics. How is Shaw and Smith addressing those in the way that they go to market?
We'll start with storytelling. Storytelling is very important. I think if you're working hard behind the scenes, you want people to understand. We won't go out and list everything we're doing. We're doing it to essentially make better wine at the end of the day. But I do want some proof to the sort of steps that you're making. And it's not necessarily on a sustainability line, but it's a bit like those viticultural investments or sort of regional investments that we might be making. So it is important. People want to feel connected. We're very big on taking people to our places. We've got great single vineyards in different regions across South Australia and Tasmania. And I think it's one thing to taste the wine, but when you're standing there and you experience it, you really understand it a bit more, and it kind of bridges the gap. They can hear us kind of getting excited about it, but you don't really feel it till you're standing there. So that's something we try to do a lot. We're always trying to bring people closer. Sustainability is important to our business. We're always thinking of ways we can improve things. From a farming side, we farm most of our sites organically in the South Australia, and Tasmania's heading that way too. But it's not so much about getting the certification, about getting the vineyard into the best shape possible. So we don't rush to do it. It's a staged sort of process, but that's important. But even in the business, looking at weight of glass that we should be using, and for our Sauvignon Blanc, which is probably our most significant wine, we've reduced the weight of glass on that recently by about 50, 60 grams. And then we have another line of wines called Other Wine Co, where we've reduced the glass weight by 300 grams because it's an early drinking wine. It's not necessary for the cellar. And so that just has a knock-on effect through the supply chain. So we're always thinking of ways to do it. We're not necessarily beating our chest about that, but it is a culture that we kind of have within our businesses.
So moving on to you, how do you balance the commercial demands of the job with a genuine love of wine and people?
Very good question. And I think that's something we keep front of mind at Shaw and Smith all the time, because we want to attract and hire people that are genuine wine nuts. And when you get onto this side, you can get lost in it. So we try to encourage our team to be involved in other parts of the industry and not just the wines we're making. So speaking for our team, a lot of our team are judging in the network of wine shows around Australia. You get to catch up with other producers or sommeliers or importers or whatever it may be, and there's a good camaraderie built out of that, and you're exposed to a lot of wine, which is good. We encourage people to use education, always further themselves with education that might not necessarily be like something that's going to jump their career, but just dive deep into do an 8-week course on France or something like that. So we're always doing that. We have a little game we play most Fridays called Options, which I'm sure some of you guys play here in the MCC Wine Committee, but it's a couple of staff might put on some blind wines and the whole team will come in together and we'll assess them and have a look at them. So we do try to keep it, the world of wine pretty front of mind, and I don't see us losing touch of that. It is important.
Are there any mentors or key figures who have shaped your approach?
It's interesting. So not specifically in terms of we would have a mentor relationship, but there have been places I've worked and people that have shown me what's possible and exposed me to things. So when I started at Prince Wine Store, and these guys wouldn't look at me as a mentor at all, but I was very green and I was surrounded by characters of the wine industry that were very experienced, and people like Philip Rich that owned that store with two partners, Michael McNamara and Alex Wilcox. They had a culture that was very strong on wine, and any week you could have Rick Kinsborough from Giaconda in the room, or James Halliday in the room doing a book signing, or Matt Skinner, who was a great young wine professional, and just the exposure would show you what was possible. And then at Coda, Travis Howe, who's now owns Carlton Wine Room, he probably put the most time into me from like a palate side of things and showing me like ways that you could apply yourself on that side. And that was instrumental, even though it wasn't like a classic mentorship. And then along the way on the business side, had people in my corner, did the Wine Australia Future Leaders program a while ago and developed a great relationship with a woman who was sort of towards the end of her career and based in the Barossa, Beck Richardson. And she coached me through lots of situations on the business side of things. And yeah, it was a great resource.
What advice would you give to someone hoping to move into a senior wine sales role? I
would suggest not trying to rush, building a really solid foundation of skills and experience. I don't think there's necessarily a linear path to that side of the world, but in terms of building your breadth of experience through different parts of the industry, it goes a long way, because you're not you understand more sides of the industry, and hopefully you sort of build a little bit of a reputation along the way. But it certainly isn't a linear path, and there's no guarantees, I think. And do the work and you expose yourself to the right situations and organizations and certifications, then you're doing the right thing. It's nothing's guaranteed, is it?
Certainly not. All right, Tom, before we wrap things up, it's time for a little fun.
Okay.
This is our fast, free-flowing segment we call Half Glass Full.
Mm-hmm.
No overthinking, just go with your gut.
Okay.
Red or white?
White.
Adelaide Hills or Coal River?
Adelaide Hills.
First wine that made you say, wow?
I'm going to say it was a Barolo, and this is going back a long time, but I'm going to say it was a Moraviglio Barolo from La Mora.
Nice. Pinot or Syrah?
That is a very hard question. I'm going to say Syrah when it's really good.
Outside of Australia, what is your favourite wine region in the world?
Another very hard question, and I think going on the last answer, I need to say the Northern Rhone.
A barbecue wine pairing?
A barbecue wine pairing. I'm going to go with a Saint Joseph, young, juicy, spicy.
Sommelier or sales manager, which is harder?
I'm going to create too many enemies if I answer that.
Fair enough. It's fine to sit on the fence. Favourite wine movie or documentary?
There was a movie many years ago, and I need to rewatch it, called Mondovino. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it was brilliant, and it was a documentary, and it went to Cannes, and it was filmed mainly in France, but a little bit around how some of the Americans were starting up to buy land in the south of France, and it was brilliant.
I haven't seen that, so I'll have to check that out. What's always in your fridge at home?
German Riesling.
Most exciting young winemaker in Australia right now?
Very good question. Most exciting young winemaker. What's young? That's, again, I might offend some people.
I don't know, maybe say under 30 or something?
Under 30. I'm going to say around no, he's probably more my age, which is close to 40, but I think Owen Latter's doing really good stuff in central Victoria. And in the Adelaide Hills, there is a few guys doing really good things. I don't know their age, but Michael Downer at Murdoch Hill is doing really good stuff as well.
I don't know why I said 30. I think a young winemaker could be 50.
True that.
Best wine bar in Adelaide?
Best wine bar in Adelaide. Well, the bar, I wouldn't say it's a wine bar per se, but the bar that I go to the most, which I really love, is Bar Torino, which is on Hutt Street.
A restaurant you miss in Melbourne?
A restaurant I miss in Melbourne, Scopri.
Favourite wine you've ever tasted?
That is very hard. Favourite wine I've ever tasted. I'm going to say the most memorable wine I've ever had, and I think, it's still set off, some like electricity, was Costerie Corton Charlemagne, 2005 vintage.
What wine are you most excited about right now in the Shaw & Smith portfolio?
In the Shaw & Smith portfolio, it is the single vineyard wines. And again, going on that Syrah line, I'd say our Balhana Shiraz. It's Adelaide Hills is not a place that a lot of people go to seek out Shiraz, but the central part of the hills is incredibly well suited to it. And Adam, our winemaker, really nails this style. Medium-bodied, spicy, fragrant, very savoury. Good for the cellar and good for a meal.
And lastly, because we're at the MCG, who's your football club?
It's still the Melbourne Football Club, but I'm worried about my 5-year-old son.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Wines. Your journey from the restaurant floor to the forefront of national wine sales is inspiring as is insightful. We've loved having you on, and we'll be watching what comes next for you and Shaw & Smith. Cheers.
Thanks, Brent. Great to have a chat.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Behind the Wines. A huge thank you for joining us. Your support means everything. Like a good wine, the best stories are meant to be shared. So make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcast platform, leave a comment, and let us know your thoughts on our socials. And go to our website for some more stories, special offers, upcoming events, and exclusive content. And special thanks to PS Wine Selections for your ongoing support. Until next time, cheers.